Thanks for being here. My name is Mile Marker, also known as Madeline. This podcast aims to discover what it means to live authentically. I work to uncover tools to help me be most present in my life. Each episode, we will discuss themes like how to listen to your body, understanding ways to be true to yourself, and learning what deep fulfillment looks like. The episodes will also relate to ideas inspired by my 2024 hike across the state of Arizona. Let's do this. Welcome to episode 21 of Musings with Mile Marker. Normally, I include the audio clip from my time on the Arizona Trail without editing it at all, so that you can hear the real experience of what I was doing on the trail. However, from day 21, it sounds extremely windy in the background, and the wind disruption is sort of problematic. So I'm just going to cut to the parts of the audio that seem relevant, and I will elaborate more on what was going on the trail beyond just the clip that we heard. So without further ado.
Hello, today is Saturday, March 30th. That means it is day 21? Yeah, something like that. Today is Saturday. I'm 11 miles in. It's on our almost noon or so. We actually started our hike a little before 6 a.m., which was the goal, so that was excellent. I made oatmeal that came from the hiker box at MJ's, and it was a little weird. Put a couple dates in it, and that was that. The train's been okay. Once we got up into the pine level for finding our camp spot, the Superstitions have been gorgeous. So this morning we walked through the pines some more. Pine Creek was stunning. I would have loved to spend just time chilling at Pine Creek, learning about wilderness areas. So BLM land is public land, but there are basically no restrictions on it. But I think you can still use like those tractors to groom the trail and stuff, intervention machines. But in wilderness areas, in order to not disturb wildlife or like maintain the sanctity of the land as much as possible, only hand tools are allowed. So the trail's a lot more rugged. So because we're in the Superior Wilderness area, it's been muddier and wetter and just generally more technical terrain, I would say. But the pine tree areas and the saddles are just the best. They're kind of flat, they're really soft from the pine needles. I've enjoyed those a lot. For the next 9 miles, which is a lot of downhill. So hopefully that feels okay. I totally forget. Oh, there are still bluebonnets out here. So ever since the first bluebonnet we saw, which was probably a little before Saguaro, they're still around. So that's nice to see them still. Okay. Once we get into Roosevelt and eat with Emily, I'm going to get my box from Becky. And then probably just go to a hotel in Phoenix area because it's going to pour rain. I really can't even imagine how intense this storm's going to be if this is 1.5 inches and then the storm that we had experienced was only 0.3. And it was still pretty intense, so wow. Going to be hefty. Okay, ciao.
What you just heard was my audio from my 21st day hiking the Arizona Trail, which is a trail from Mexico to Utah across the state of Arizona. I want to spend a minute talking about the difference between the land designation types in the United States, as well as a little bit about the Roosevelt Marina or the town of Roosevelt, Arizona, and compare that to something that I recently did, which was hiking in France. So I am not an expert on land designations in the United States. However, I can briefly talk about the BLM
versus the national forest versus the wilderness land. BLM land stands for Bureau of Land Management, which is just a general sense of public land in the U.S., land owned by the government. And a lot of BLM land has basically no restrictions, meaning you can boondock on it, or you can hunt on it, or you can just kind of generally use it. You can have cattle on it, perhaps, grazing rights. There are different ways that citizens, like we, can access the BLM land and use it. But with national forest land or national parks land or wilderness areas, those have more restrictions. And I believe that is for the preservation of land in the U.S. as we know it. And this is something that I was generally unaware of before I started the trail, but it became very clear when you would enter different land types because of the quality of the trail or because of the way that the trails were established and used. So some of these types of lands would have jeep trails, meaning like dirt roads, gravel roads that you could feasibly drive a four-wheel drive access car on. We didn't often see vehicles on them, but if it's wilderness land, there's probably no road. In fact, let me read a little bit about what the wilderness land designates. There are no cars, trucks, ATVs, or motored items of any kind, including chainsaws. Chainsaws are very common for maintaining trails because if a tree falls across a trail, you normally use a chainsaw to cut it up and move it off the trail. But if you're in wilderness land and there's no chainsaw, then you would have to either climb over the deadfall or walk around it somehow, or you could have people using hand saws in order to restore the trail to some degree. There are also no machines, which includes bikes, carts, wheelbarrows, or drones. There are no structures, buildings, permanent camps, or commercial resorts, and no cutting or logging. General tree cutting is forbidden. So the wilderness areas are really wild, for lack of a better word. And I really appreciate this. I like that the trails are technical. I like that it is maintaining the essence of the land that feels pure. I understand that all of this wilderness land would be hard for general people to navigate, perhaps, but maintaining some portions of land in the U.S. in this wild state is a beautiful thing to me. It's also a little bit funny that I was looking forward to the final 9 miles being all net downhill when it was still kind of slow going. I think that the downhill often in my early days of hiking meant ease of hiking, but it was an arroyo, which is basically a dry riverbed, and it was kind of loose and rocky, and I just remember thinking this downhill is much less forgiving than I was hoping it would be. But like any trail, you really can never have too many expectations, and the trail is going to be whatever condition it wants to be. I had to be patient with myself and keep moving one foot after another to head into the marina, because the marina was the reprieve. The marina was where we were meeting our friends. That was where we were re-engaging with civilization and leaving the Superstition Wilderness area. Something that I want to mention that's related to my life today, it is currently August 2026, and I have just returned from 8 days of hiking in the Alps. I did the Tour du Mont Blanc hike, which is 102 miles around the glacier of Mont Blanc. Mont Blanc is actually the high point of France. It is 15,774 feet in elevation. And this 8-day hike that I did is the first through hike of sorts that I have done since the Arizona Trail. And one of the distinctions that I want to address or just mention is the difference between the food access.
especially in the remote portions of the trail. So there are gondolas and more general ways to get to the trails from the Alps in France, Italy, and Switzerland than there are on these remote parts of the Arizona Trail. The Arizona Trail, I would say, for the most part, is very desolate, very isolated from civilization. But I would say the majority of this TMB, Tour du Mont Blanc Trail, is close to a village most of the time, or at least close to a mountain hut. And the mountain huts were such a different feature of this European trail as opposed to the trail in Arizona. And in Arizona, there were trail angels and there were places to seek shelter off trail, but often they were a ways away from the actual trail, and they were kind of in civilization. They were part of a town and part of a village. But with these huts, you would be in the middle of a mountain range effectively, and then there would just be a refuge, a functional building with electricity and running water and food and shelter, which just feels so unique, or something that I'd never experienced, I guess I should say. And if I want to compare approaching the Roosevelt Marina, Roosevelt, Arizona is the town adjacent to Roosevelt Lake, and Roosevelt Lake is the largest reservoir entirely in Arizona. And this marina is a cute little boathouse. And the menu at this boathouse was traditional American fare. Fish and chips, hamburgers, little cheese pizzas, French fries, onion rings, coleslaw, etc. But at the refuge in Italy, one particular one in Italy, the menu was, I took a picture of it, pasta with ragu, soup of the day with bread, croutons, polenta, which I ordered, polenta with mushrooms, which was delicious. Their homemade dessert, I believe, is blueberry pie. There was a lot of blueberry pie on the trail. And I don't want to necessarily just completely disparage American dining options, but considering that I was in a remote place in France, or in this case Italy, and I was also in a remote place in Arizona, the access to food is likely similar, but the quality and the variety just felt so much fresher and more wholesome in Europe. And I think the general hiking experience, from actually being on trail and friendliness of people, was quite similar on the TMB as on the Arizona Trail. But the concept of these mountain huts existing in Europe and the fact that there was nothing of the sort on the Arizona Trail is a little bit sad. And it's not to say that it can't be established, but I'll also add this. So much of the national park services are corporately run. I think a lot of the restaurants, or at least the staffing, is done through Aramark. And in Europe, all of these places are tiny, small businesses. I don't know if they're family owned or not, but they're definitely not corporate run. And I feel like I just seek so much simplicity and so much authenticity and so much preservation of culture and things that are unique. And doing that through small businesses feels much more aligned with things that I like compared to just big corporate owned cookie cutter institutions. And I hope that I'm very confident that there are hidden gems on trails in the United States of America that are fulfilling this niche mountain, backcountry, wholesome essence, but it's certainly few and far between and not mainstream. The fact that this is sort of mainstream, the access to these huts and access to this unbelievably healthy, fresh food in the mountains was something I had, again, never experienced before when I did this hike in France, Italy, and Switzerland. So I would, of course, continue to recommend the Arizona Trail to people, but because it is remote and because it is requiring you to be much more prepared, I think that the access to hiking and just trying to dip your toe in, experiencing nature, felt much, much more accessible in France. But I guess the moral of my spiel today is experience trails. Go find nature near you or go travel to nature. I think it's easy for things to feel daunting and to want to be super prepared and want to know exactly what you're going to get yourself into. Are my trails going to be groomed like a Bureau of Land Management dirt road? Or am I going to be going into wilderness where the trail might be uneven or feel like a scramble? And where can I get food? Where can I get water? I think being able to prepare is, of course, essential, but also knowing that you are capable and you can do something hard for 1 or 2 days kind of allows a sense of unknowing or just experiencing nature for what it is and bringing what you need. Experiencing self-sufficiency is a really beautiful thing. So I guess that's my tale. Go hiking in Arizona, go hiking in France, go experience local culture, whether that is eating deep fried onions or polenta with mushrooms on any mountainside or lakeside that you see fit. Have experiences.
That concludes this episode of Musings with Mile Marker. Thanks for listening. The intro and outro music are from a track called Wake Robin, composed and recorded by my late grandfather, Bob Ackery. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Polly Morwood. Production and editing of this podcast were done by me, your host, Mile Marker, aka Madeline Ackery. See you next time.